Welcome to the 31st video of the Just In Case video series that's sponsored by Quality and Equality, an OD consultancy firm based in Oxford, United Kingdom. And my name is Mayan, and I'm the director of the firm. And the Just In Case video is really trying to be offering free resources to remind those of you who are in the field of OD how to continue to do lifelong learning. And today I'm so pleased to introduce a video. Let me tell you about the video first before the contributor. And today the video is a very timely and practical video offering information about how you can make a difference with your online presence while being grounded in OD principles. So there is the cross-section of how do you maintain your online presence. As you know, presence are very important, and crossover with holding truth to the OD principle. And the contributor kindly shares a range of tools and software she has used while designing engaging meetings and conversation virtually. This is a very interesting video filled with a wide range of case studies and reflection on how to use the virtual space, along with quite detailed practical idea to provoke or evoke you to maybe continue to innovate. And so please keep notes as you review it. I have tremendous joy watching it, commissioning it, and I hope you will have the same experience. So let me tell you who's the contributor. The contributor is Sheena Cartwright, a very well-experienced OD practitioner. She has a flawless blue chip career history. She worked for the John Lewis Partnership, Mars, Coca-Cola Enterprise, Vodafone, Alexander Main Solution. And through those different sectors, she held a variety of roles across learning, OD, HR, and both in UK, Europe, and North America. She's now practicing on her own. She has a tremendous desire to be accessible, available to support young talents in OD, and willing to help people to sort out very wicked problems. And I'm very pleased that she has agreed to me to do this video in such timely fashion. So Sheena, thank you so much for what you are willing to do for us.
Thank you, Mayan, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking with this community today. Like many others, in the last 9 months, my work has all shifted online. That's required a really steep learning curve for me on technology, on designing in a virtual world, and how I use myself. In this video, I'm going to explore how I have adapted to use myself online and to stay true to the OD principles that have always guided my work. I will share some examples of how I've moved that work online, but also some tips about how to work in a virtual world and maximize the use of your presence. So what are some of the OD principles that have guided my work? Well, I'm sure these will be familiar to you. Firstly, it's important that we think systemically. We try and include as much of the system as possible in our work. We also need to think about participation. How do we surface the diversity of perspectives and leverage the wisdom that's in the system? Of course, context is everything. And this year, more than ever, we've had to learn to work with complexity, with emergence and ambiguity. And finally, most importantly, I think, is our use of self. And in OD, use of self sits right at the center. We see ourselves as the primary instrument that we have to effect change. And so I'm going to explore use of self and presence, which for me is the intentional use of self. We know that we need to involve as many different parts of the system in our work as we can, so we can understand different perspectives. Working virtually can give us opportunities to involve more people than if we were to operate only in person. For example, we can bring people together from around the world onto a Zoom call or a Teams call with hardly any financial cost apart from their time and no environmental impact of travel. Recently, I was consulting with a large multinational retailer. The first stage of the work was to do some diagnostic on the current and desired culture. Now, in non-COVID times, we would have brought people together physically into some workshops. But what we did instead was work with a group of 20 people from across the organisation in different roles, levels, locations, nationalities. We met once per week using MS Teams. And as part of that process, we asked them to interview a minimum of 3 other people, again at different levels and roles. And we got them to record these outputs on Mural. Now, Mural is an online collaboration tool. There are many, but Mural is the one that I have used the most. It's like a giant blank wall that you can stick post-it notes to, put PowerPoint slides on, put images onto. It's just a creative space. And you can see an example here on the screen. So once the data was there, we got the group to work in smaller groups to sift parts of the data, post up the themes, and then we brought them back together to synthesize all of these themes further and match in with other data points from their company survey and focus groups and come to some outputs. And over the last 3 months, these outputs have now been taken to the board, agreed as a set of cultural priorities with actions already in place. But what's been really interesting is that the experience itself has been a development journey for those people involved. They have said to me that they have felt they've had conversations that they wouldn't have had before. There's been a level of honesty about their own behaviour in the past that has come out of some of those sessions. And I don't really believe we could have moved as quickly or as comprehensively in taking a view across the system if we had been constrained by face-to-face workshops. Well, I guess one thing I would say is if you are going to use a tool like Mural, firstly, get used to it yourself. Make sure that you're familiar with how it works and play with it and experiment. Simple things like locking down templates and giving clear instructions can really help to make it easier for others to use. Start with something small, like adding a question or posting some information about yourself, and maybe then build up to something more complex. You'll see on the slide here, this was a team workshop I ran where I got everyone to contribute a few pieces about themselves, and they've had photos on the mural, so they could just add their own information to next to their photo and their name. But I think something that's important is making sure that Mural doesn't dominate the process. I have found in working with Mural that sometimes people get too focused on completing the task rather than having a good dialogue. So it's important to make sure that we make that clear. We need to always give people options. Some people are really uncomfortable with technology. So they can add comments in a meeting chat, or they can email them to you, and be patient with people as they're learning their way in new pieces of technology. So let's talk about participation. We've already talked about it being critical in our work, but we can't just have people showing up. We need to surface the diversity of perspectives and leverage the wisdom in the system. So how do we draw out the diversity of perspectives? Well, I think there's quite a few things that you can do to enable this virtually. Firstly, we have to create safety for people. One of the things that I have done is using anonymous tools like Mural, because people don't have to declare who they are, to contribute what's really in their hearts and on their minds. I've used it in advance of meetings for people to post up questions which are completely anonymous, and it enables people to feel that their voice is heard, even if they don't want to speak up in a meeting. We can see on this slide that people have added information about themselves and questions in advance of the meeting. But I've also helped people feel that they're connected and showing up in the group by getting them to move their photo to where in the world they are, creating a visual representation of the global community. I've also used other tools like Mentimeter, an online instant polling tool, to ask people to submit words on how they are feeling. And you'll see those on the slide here, showing up immediately in a word cloud, so we can get a sense of what the mood is, both what's similar and what's different in the room. And as I would in a face-to-face workshop, I break people up into small groups. Primarily, I use Zoom, as that's easy to use. These groups can be completely random, and so people get to work with different people at every session. In a recent workshop with over 55 attendees over 2 days, I tracked all these groups and found that people had the chance to work with at least 50% of the other participants over the 2 days. So lots of opportunities for great dialogue. I also find creative ways for people to give their input. You'll see here on the slide, we had a session where people built metaphors around a boat. Some people drew pictures, some people posted pictures from the internet, some people used words. It's giving people choices, and of course, that's always really important. I've had lots of feedback from clients that's saying that actually working in small rooms, breakout rooms in Zoom, can actually feel more intimate and safer than discussions in the real world. You can't be overheard. You can see if someone else is nearby because they appear in your room. And that actually people have got to the more open, honest conversations more quickly than if they had been in person. So I think that's something that we all need to explore and work with more. Technology, of course, means that people can access meetings even if they wouldn't have been normally able to come for family, health, or travel constraint reasons. So it can be much more inclusive. But there are some things that we do need to watch out for. So we need to bear in mind that people may not have access to quiet spaces, to good internet. They may not be able to or want to use their cameras. They may not even have a camera. So we need to find ways to be inclusive, to give people choices on how they participate. Don't demand that people turn their cameras on. Don't make an issue out of connectivity issues. These things happen. They happen to all of us. Be patient and listen. And ask people to contribute questions via chat if they're struggling to connect or make their comments there. And provide dial-in options if people can't access through the internet. Another thing to watch out for is about participants making meaning of what you do when it's not your intention. Recently, I ran a workshop for one session where we were having random breakout groups. It happened that all the attendees from Africa ended up in one group. They made meaning of this and thought it had been intentional, but actually it was purely coincidence. So if groups are random, truly, then tell your audience that they're random and they may end up with whoever. And if they're not random and you are intentionally putting people together, be honest about it. If we want people to be honest with us, we need to model honesty. And my final tip would be, if we are using technology and different tools, give people notice. Some people want to check those things out in advance, open them up on their browser before they get into the meeting, or go and explore the platform. Hence why I often give people those small tasks to do in advance on Mural or another platform that you might be using. So context is everything. This is a fundamental principle that we can never lose sight of. At the moment, in 2020, our context is one of complexity, ambiguity, and emergence. We need to acknowledge this in our work and recognize the impact that this is having on both the individuals and the systems that we work with. So, what have I done to do that? Well, I feel I have built space into all the online workshops I've run over the last 9 months to help people explore this. This might be in the form of some well-crafted check-in questions in small groups that help people to connect with their current reality, both the good and the bad of it, and the impact it's having on them. It might be in connecting with the things that have, for example, brought them joy during times of lockdown or a particularly challenging time. In a recent workshop, I asked people to get up and go and find in their houses something that had brought them joy. And they brought everything from partners to children to pets, running shoes, chocolate, wine, books, artworks, bicycles. There was no end to the creativity and the variation in what people brought. And we then got them to share them back in categories so that we could see that diversity. And it helped people to connect, to see that different people find different things to help them through these challenging times. Sometimes it might just be about creating moments of silence for people to be truly present and to be able to let go of what is going on outside of this particular meeting, but be aware of it in the back of our mind. Sometimes it's about helping people to truly breathe, which resonates, of course, particularly in these times of COVID-19. One exercise that one of my colleagues, Janie Van Hool, taught me that I often use is a simple breathing exercise. To breathe in deeply for a count of 5, to hold that for a count of 7, and then breathe out slowly for a count of 8, and to repeat that 3 times. I've used that quite a lot, both for myself in preparing for today, but also in the workshops that I've run, when I can sense that people are very anxious. It can just help center and calm the group down to get focused on what needs to be done. I've also helped people explore the kind of balance that we're currently getting and getting them to maybe work in small groups on what can really help people to stay resilient and manage their own energy in a world where the boundaries sometimes have disappeared in our lives. It can be just about helping people to connect as humans now that the informal networking that we had at work, the glue that holds organizations together, has kind of gone. So sometimes it might be an end of the day virtual cocktail or coffee meeting, getting people to mingle and mix and not talk about work in the way that you would if you were at a real meeting. So these are things that I've tried, that I've experimented with, and that I think people have found have brought connection. And I'm sure there'll be many more examples that we're all going to have to use in the days to come. So what are some tips around this? Well, it is about acknowledging that being online is our context. We are doing the same work, but differently. And we need to really help people to manage being online and the energy it takes. The research says that actually being on Zoom calls or Teams calls takes up more energy. We have to listen with more intensity. So it's important that we build in really regular breaks, that as much as possible, we make sure that people can stand up and move around. I run a lot of my workshops standing up rather than sitting down. And if we can find things that can help the people that are part of your group to get up, go outside, get moving, it's really important. It's also important when we're working in ambiguity that we actually are prepared to flex and change what we do, to stay in awareness, to read the room and adjust as needed. Make sure that we're really noticing what is going on and bring what maybe is missing in that system. That is important. And that really brings us on to the final piece I wanted to talk about, which is about use of self. So as I mentioned, one of the things that is absolutely critical in OD is that we use ourselves as an instrument. So I take a Gestalt view and say that presence is use of self with intent. You'll see here a slide, a definition of presence. that I learnt on the iGOLD program, the International Gestalt Organization and Leadership Development Program, where it talks about presence coming out of all of who we are. It is how we use our heart, how we use our mind, how we use our spirit, and how we use our body. And how do we do that in a way that's interesting to the client? Some of you may be familiar with the concept of the Perceived Weirdness Index, which John O'Hanafin wrote about. He said that we need to be different enough to add value, but not so different that we are rejected by the system. And as an OD practitioner, one of the things that I had always had positive feedback on was my presence. People said they felt my impact and that it was a positive, sort of moving presence in the room. And when I first came to working online, I really wondered about how I was going to use that same presence online. I had real misgivings about whether I could have that impact. And I remember back in April, one of the first large workshops I ran was for 55 people. I persuaded my client that we could try to do something online. But if I'm honest, I was slightly terrified. What happened if the whole meeting was flat? What happened if the technology failed? But it was only when I realized, with the help of my supervision group, that I could still bring the best of me. I could still provide what is missing. I could be courageous and I could make an impact. So what did I do to make this successful, this meeting that I ran? Well, I spent a long time getting ready myself, not just working on the design, but thinking about how I was going to show up. I did what I could do to take the pressure of the technology away from me. I both practiced, but also had a technical facilitator, in that case, my husband, to do all the behind the scenes work. I spent time centering myself and paying attention to how I was feeling and what those emotions might mean. I thought about what I would wear, something bright that would make me stand out, like I'm wearing today. I made sure I had a great microphone so I could be heard, that I had good lighting so that people could see all of my face. I readied my office with 2 screens and my husband accessible in the room next door. I made sure I made friends with a little light on my camera and spoke to that, and really made sure that I still smiled and made people feel welcome. And I breathed, and I recognized I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be me. Well, the result was that first workshop went so well that I'm now on my 4th large-scale workshop with that same group. They were working on their vision and mission, and they've agreed that, and I'm continuing to support them as they work towards bringing that to life. So there were loads of things that I learned through those experiences in the early days, and I continue to learn. I think probably the most fundamental is that it takes even more preparation for online workshops than it does actually for being in person. And that actually it's important to pay attention to how you're going to show up. I've run a number of development sessions on this subject, and I'm often surprised by how people haven't thought about how they are seen as they turn up in a virtual world. And one of the things that I have done is actually get people sometimes to work in small groups and give each other feedback about what they notice about them, that individual, what they notice about their background, and to actually give that feedback. Because how often do we get told, well, actually, I couldn't see half of your face, or you spoke too quickly, or I was distracted by what was on your bookcase, or I couldn't really hear you because maybe your microphone isn't as good as it needs to be. So it's important we pay attention to all of the dimensions of presence. It really matters. So I just have a few tips that I'm going to share with you about how you might use your presence and things to pay attention to when you're doing an online workshop. And I'm going to put these in the frame of the unit of work, which is the Gestalt cycle of experience seen as both beginning, middle, and end. A finished unit of work is a bounded and understandable experience, event, or project. So let's have a look at those pieces. The beginning. How do we make sure that as people join a meeting, they feel welcome, they feel noticed as they come in, they're referenced by name if possible? How do you ease people into the technology, maybe just helping them to navigate because we all use so many different online platforms? How do we make sure that we create as much safety as possible about the meeting and how people can be in it and be heard? And how do we make sure that we get people's voices into the room as early as possible, whether that be in them speaking in the whole group, speaking in small groups, or via the chat, or via Mural? In the middle, it's absolutely important that we continue to think about our voice. How are we using that powerful voice that we have? How do we make sure that we can be heard? How do we make sure that we continue to make eye contact, that we think about our body language, that we manage our own breathing and pay attention to when maybe the breathing is coming up and not down from the deep in our lungs? How do we stay connected with our intentions all the way through and maintaining our awareness? And at the end, how do we make sure that we close with intentionality, that we are actually closing out the learning, that we are giving people the opportunity to move away? That might be through a ritual, might be through a moment of silence, it might be in hearing words from everybody in the room, whether spoken or via chat. And how do we make sure it's not rushed? But all the way through, we have to stay in awareness. We have to be aware of what's going on for us and what, as much as possible, is going on for others. And as we come to an end, of course, we must always think about, what are we learning? We need to build good reflective practices into our work. As Professor Jameson said in the Use of Self for Leaders video, we must learn from our experiences. So it's important at the end that we capture the learning, we leave nothing open, but also that we make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. So the final thoughts that I have for you are, don't lose sight of the OD principles that you work with when you're working online. Be creative and be prepared to flex and adapt. Really importantly, show up to use all of yourself. As John Nkum would say, the more I give, the more I grow. I think we all have a role to play in continuing to experiment with doing OD online. Many of us are finding our way, and we also have to help leaders to find their way in using this medium. It's a new reality for all of us. So I really hope that you'll go out and notice what you notice about working online, and let's all work together to continue to grow the field of OD. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. I really hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, my contact details will be at the end. And thank you again to Mayanne for this opportunity to share with you all.
On behalf of everyone, Sheena, may I say a big thank you to you for giving such an interesting, practical video on online presence in an increasingly online world. You bring so much grounding energy to me just watching the video. Thank you for sharing those wisdoms and experience about how to actually make the OD principle come alive, even in the virtual world. I am very grateful. to you for taking the time. If you want to contact Sheena, or her contact information, bio, and link at the end of the video. So thank you to your audience for taking your time to watch. And if you want to send us any feedback, I'm sure Sheena will love to have it. And if you want to make connections, do so with her directly. And thank you, Sheena, one more time for your wisdom and for your availability to the OD community. Thank you.